Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Chair, and today we will be reviewing the album Let It Be by the Beatles. Now before we get into the content, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. We really do appreciate it. As usual, the album is scored in 3 categories: the context behind the creation of the album, the songs on the album, and then of course the album cover. Now jumping right into the context, the Beatles, where we left off, released Abbey Road in middle of 1969, and then, as we thought, the band would be breaking up and going their separate ways. However, apparently they wanted to make one more album. Now, if you remember in the previous episode, I briefly mentioned the Get Back sessions that happened in January of 1969. They were kind of filming a documentary style film, but it didn't really go anywhere. The music was just bits and pieces, and they kind of scrapped most of that work there, as then they worked on Abbey Road. Or so we thought. But with the release of the documentary still coming out, the fans wanted to listen to music that would be on that documentary. So unfortunately, the producers and marketers of this asked the Beatles to create another album, even though Abbey Road was essentially the curtain closer and the finale to the band. So they set a new goal of reworking the previous little pieces of music they heard in the documentary into full-fledged songs and one final album for the band. One glaring issue into this was the fact that John Lennon at this time had left the Beatles. Shortly after September of 1969, when they released Abbey Road, John Lennon stepped away from the band. So the Beatles were now just a trio. With just 3 out of the 4 members, they weren't going to re-record and make new music per se, so they weren't really going to work on the scraps they had either. In steps infamous murderer Phil Spector. Now, before he was shooting his way into a prison sentence, he was killing it behind the scenes in the music production business in the 1960s. They invited him in to kind of work with the music, and he kind of took all the scraps from the Get Back sessions and made a full-fledged album. So after the finale, we got one more album, Let It Be, released in May of 1970. The 3 remaining Beatles all gathered really to work on these last couple scraps of music, with mostly Phil Spector running the scenes. The group didn't really record any new music. I will say they did rework a song, George Harrison, I Me Mine. They did go back in the studio in January of 1970 and just kind of did a couple more takes of it to make a full song, rather than the bits and pieces that he worked on a year prior. The album, of course, was another commercial success, as it was paired with the film. However, to me, I do feel like that this was just the marketing team squeezing out the last bit of money they could get out of the band before the inevitable breakup of the Fab Four. Like I said, Lennon had already left, and with Abbey Road being this beautiful finale, this feels more like a hodgepodge put together of just some songs that they had left over and that was just thrown onto a vinyl. Add to that the heavy production and involvement of Phil Spector and not really a lot of help from the Beatles. It doesn't really feel like a full Beatles album, and because of that, in the context category, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. Nothing extraordinary, still some cool stuff to learn about the Beatles' history, as this kind of is the end of the group being together for the last time. But yeah, nothing special. But how are the songs on the album? Well, it starts off with Two of Us and Dig a Pony, 2 songs that were kind of worked on during the Get Back sessions that were made up into some full songs there. Next would be Across the Universe, a 1968 John Lennon song that he had been working on for a few years now. That he never really finalized, but with the help of Phil Spector, they kind of made it into this peaceful, melodic song that's very nice to listen to. Up next is the previously mentioned I Me Mine, the George Harrison song that kind of balances a 3-4 and 4-4 balance that I do really enjoy. Dig It and Maggie May are sub 60-second jam sessions that are just kind of thrown on top of the vinyl. And Let It Be is also on the first side, a Beatles classic that we know, a McCartney track that was also made during the Get Back sessions. Side 2 kicks off with some actual live recordings. If you remember last episode, I briefly mentioned that rooftop concert.
Whatever. I'll do it if we've got to go on the roof.
You're the band.
But I don't want to go.
That rooftop concert was recorded, and they took the pieces of music from that concert and put it on the album. So we get I Got a Feeling and One After 909 to start off side 2. And then we get Long and Winding Road, which is another Paul slow ballad track that Phil Spector heavily used his production skills on. Paul would later say he really hated the production on it. For You Blue is another George Harrison song from the Get Back sessions. And the final song is, of course, Get Back, which closes the album. Personally, I like 6 out of the 12 tracks on the album. I think Two of Us has a really nostalgic feel to me. It's a song I've known for a few years and just really has a sweet meaning to me. Across the Universe is very similar. I love that song. It's actually probably one of my favorite John Lennon tracks, as well as I'm Mine is one of my favorite Harrison songs on this album. Just a really fun rocking song. You add the 2 ballads of Let It Be and Long and Winding Road to McCartney's collection. And then, of course, the finale, Get Back, is always a really fun jam I do enjoy. The short jams and the rooftop stuff somewhat kind of blend to me and don't really stick out as fully fledged Beatles songs, which kind of highlight the fact that this really is just a chop up pieces of work kind of glued together on a vinyl. And so for that, I don't really enjoy that. The final score of this category is kind of a perfect half, a 2.5 out of 5, right middle of the road for this album when it's about the songs. Finally, we reach the album cover, and to me, I don't really see anything special with this album cover. It is just for pictures of Beatles taken during the Get Back sessions, just put together on a black background. Some people could say that it means that, it shows the split of the 4 Beatles, but to me, I feel like that they just couldn't get the band all together to do a photo shoot for the album because the band couldn't really care less of putting this album together. For that, it's nothing special and it doesn't sit anywhere in comparison to the other album covers we looked at by the band. Easily, this one's going to get a 2 out of 5 in the album cover category. Adding up all the scores, we reach a final score of a 7.5 out of 15, which is perfectly a middle 50% score, which I think kind of fits the album well. To me, it is a bit of a half-assed Beatles album because the Beatles weren't really working on the music, and Phil Spector's involvement was really heavy at the time, so it is kind of like a half-and-half album. It's not all bad. I think there is some good ideas at play, but it just wasn't fully fleshed out because the band didn't really want to work on it. This score puts the album at the bottom of all the Beatles albums we've looked at in this series so far. Not even close to the nearest album because all the other albums were in the double digits of points. And then regarding the overall series, it kind of nestles it once again right in the middle of our series, right between High Voltage and Life Beyond LA. But we finally finished all the Beatles albums. It did take a hot minute, but I do hope you enjoyed the journey and enjoyed the episodes we've done so far. Maybe if I do get some more Beatles albums along the way in my collection, we can come back and add it to the list. But for now, we did finish all of them. I do hope you enjoyed them. And next time, we will be looking at a bit of a switch up here. We are going to be looking at Billie Eilish's work. This is her EP, Don't Smile at Me. That was released in 2017. So kind of a change up for some more modern music, so tune into that. Of course, once again, like, comment, subscribe. All of the creators enjoy that on this channel. Shout out to Kylie, Anna, Jackie, Claire, as always, and we hope to see you next time.